So welcome everyone to Macroeconomics exercise session 2. Today or on this video we are going to cover consumption shock, fiscal policies and income structure, and we would start our discussion with problem 6, consumption shock, fiscal policies and income structure. The equilibrium condition of the domestic goods market is given by Y is equal to CO, autonomous consumption, C1, marginal propensity to consume, multiplied by income minus tax, plus investment and plus government expenditure G. The first item of this problem 6 is multipliers. So we are asked to formally derive the government expenditure multiplier and the tax multiplier. How do you interpret the positive and negative sign of both multipliers? Before we move on, we need to define what a government multiplier is, government expenditure multiplier. So government expenditure multiplier is, by definition, it is by how much would our income change if the government expenditure changes. So mathematically written, it can be said that the change in income, Y, divided by the change in government expenditure. You may remember on the first part, we are given the equilibrium condition in the domestic goods market, which is given by Y is equal to autonomous consumption CO plus multiplied by marginal propensity to consume, income minus tax, plus investment and government expenditure G. The first thing that we have to do is we have to collect our Y items to the left-hand side so that we would work our way through easily. So first I would get rid of the bracket here, so I would multiply C1 with Y minus C1 multiplied by T plus investment plus government expenditure. And then I can take this term to the other side where I am subtracting C1Y from both sides. This would give me Y minus C1Y is equal to CO minus C1T plus investment plus government expenditure. And then here I can take Y and open a bracket here to put a term 1 minus C1, which would give us again the similar representation that we have just made. So if I divide both sides by 1 minus C1, I would get a formula which looks like Y is equal to 1 over 1 minus C1, CO minus C1, T plus investment plus government expenditure in a bracket. So we have already mentioned that to calculate the government expenditure multiplier, we want to use the formula dy over dg, and this can be simplified by using total differential concept, which you may already know by now. If not, we would put some basic mathematics slides in the beginning, and you would be able to familiarize yourself with the total differential concept from there. So having this formula written here, the total differential of Y, which is represented by dy, can be written as 1 over 1 minus C1, and the bracket term we would have d C0 minus C1 multiplied by the dt plus di plus dg, which is the government expenditure. As we have said, the government expenditure is a representative or a reflection of by how much would our income change when the government expenditure changes by one more unit. And here we would make assumptions that our parameter C0 and our two variables, tax and investment, are constant, so they would not change. So the assumption we make here is our parameter CO doesn't change, so DCO would be 0. Our investment variable doesn't change, so DI would be 0. Our tax doesn't change, so DT would be 0. So all of these three would be 0. If I replace these values of 0 in the total differential formula that I gave you here, we would have dy is equal to 1 over 1 minus C1 multiplied by dC0, which would be changed to 0, minus C1 multiplied by dt, which would again be is equal to 0, plus di, which would be again 0, plus the final term dg. Simplifying it, we would have dy is equal to 1 over 1 minus C1 multiplied by dg. And we have initially mentioned that the government expenditure multiplier is represented by the formula dy over dg. That is to say, by how much would our income change if government expenditure changes by 1 unit. So if we divide both sides by dg, we would have a formula which would look like dy over dg is equal to 1 over 1 minus C1. As you can see, this is greater than 0. And how do you interpret the positive sign of this dy over dg is a good exercise question for you to discuss among yourselves. The positive sign of the government expenditure multiplier can be interpreted in a way that if government expenditure increases, income would also increase, and if government expenditure decreases, income would also decrease. The second part of this exercise is to derive the tax multiplier. So tax multiplier, just like the government expenditure, we interpret it as by how much would our income change if tax changes by 1 unit. And it's again represented by the formula dy over dt. The total differential that we have just defined would also be helpful in identifying the tax multiplier in our case here. So if you remember, we have just said dy is equal to 1 over 1 minus C1 multiplied by dC0 minus C1 multiplied by dt plus di plus dg. And here the assumption that we make is that our parameter dC0 would be 0 because it's not changing. Our first variable I would also be 0. Investment is not changing. And our government expenditure is not changing. So our DG would be 0. So these three terms from our formula would be equal to 0. So if I put this out of not ct, di 0, dg 0, I would have a formula which would be minus c1 dt, and the rest is changed to 0. As I have said, the tax multiplier is dy over dt, so I would divide both sides by dt, where I get dy over dt is equal to minus c1 over 1 minus c1. And this amount is less than 0. How would you interpret the negative sign? As we have said, for the government expenditure, the taxes could also be interpreted in the same way. When taxes increase, income would decrease, so they have a negative relationship. And when taxes decrease, income would increase, so they have a negative relationship. This is how you would interpret the negative sign of the tax multiplier.